Coming up, leaders from around the world attend Queen Elizabeth II's funeral and pay their respects. South Korean President Yoon was at the service in London as he wraps up his first stop of his overseas trip. Now, off to New York for the UN General Assembly. Lawmakers call up government officials for the second day of questions. Tuesday's topic, diplomacy, security, and North Korea. OECD raises South Korea's growth projections slightly, but that's not to say the country isn't worried over inflation. Good morning. Welcome to New Day at Arirang. Britain and the world paid a final farewell to the nation's longest reigning monarch on Monday. Queen Elizabeth II has now been buried alongside her late husband, Prince Philip, at Windsor Castle. Kim Yo-sun starts us off this morning.
The imperial state crown, the symbol of the monarch's power and governance, was removed from Queen Elizabeth's coffin during her committal service on Monday. This marked the end of the late Queen's reign. Some 800 guests attended the service at St. George's Chapel in Windsor Castle before the Queen's burial. Later in the evening, in a private family service, the Queen was buried alongside her husband, Prince Philip, who died last year at the age of 99. Windsor Castle is the resting place of over a dozen kings and queens, including Queen Elizabeth's parents and sister. After announcing that she had been buried at Windsor Castle, the royal family disclosed a previously unpublished photograph of the Queen. The Queen's death marks the beginning of her son King Charles III's reign. Britain now awaits its first coronation in nearly 7 decades. King Charles' coronation has not yet been given a date, but it will take place at Westminster Abbey, as has been the tradition for the past 1,000 years. Watchers say the new king will likely be crowned following a suitable period of grief in the spring or summer of next year. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
Indeed, a funeral of the century. Leaders and monarchs from across the globe gathered in London to bid farewell to the UK's longest reigning monarch, Queen Elizabeth II. President Yoon and First Lady Kim Gun-hee were among them. Our editor-in-chief Moon Gun-young files this report from London.
Leaders of royalty and members of the British royal family gathered in London on Monday to mourn Queen Elizabeth II amid scenes of matchless pageantry. A fitting end for Britain's longest-serving monarch, who won respect of the world over her 70 years on the throne. King Charles and other senior royals followed her flag-draped coffin into Westminster Abbey at the start of her state funeral, the country's first since Winston Churchill was given the honor 57 years ago. Among the 500 foreign dignitaries, President Yoon and First Lady Kim Gun-hee, as leaders from nearly every country in the world bade farewell to the Queen. Having offered his deep condolence to King Charles III the evening before, the South Korean leader paid tribute to a queen who practiced a life of solidarity among liberal democratic nations during her 70-year reign. Outside the Abbey, hundreds of thousands of people lined the streets as the Queen's casket made the short journey from Westminster Hall, where she had been lying in state, pulled along a gun carriage by 142 sailors with arms linked. A bell tolled and bagpipes skirled.
Well, it obviously is a very sad day, but equally we've got to be thankful for the good times that we've all shared as a country with the Jubilee quite recently, and also moving forward to the new king. Well, I think that's amazing that people have come from all over the world. It shows how well she was regarded across the whole world, not only this country and the Commonwealth, but the entire world.
She's done an important job in her time as Queen. In those 70 years, she's been the diplomat of our country and set such an example to women and others in this world.
So how do you foresee the UK will be like under the reign of King Charles III?
It's a new journey.
Yeah, a new journey. I think we'll be okay. I think we'll be okay.
Following the funeral service, the South Korean leader signed the official condolence book in memory of the late Queen.
Having paid tribute to the late Queen, South Korean President Yoon wraps up his London leg of a three-nation tour and leaves for New York to attend the first UN General Assembly as South Korean president. 문건영, Arirang News, London.
While in London, President Yoon awarded a Medal of Honor to a British veteran who defended the South during the Korean War. The Civil Merit Medal was presented to Mr. Victor Swift, an 88-year-old war veteran who served in the Corps of the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers some 70 years ago. President Yoon thanked him for his dedication and the sacrifice he made to defend freedom, adding the Republic of Korea is here today thanks to such efforts. The South Korean leader is currently on a three-nation tour of the U.S., the UK, and Canada, which he said was very meaningful as the three countries greatly contributed to the fight against the communist invasion. South Korean Foreign Minister Park Jin sat down with his Japanese counterpart in New York on Monday. And following talks, which lasted about 50 minutes, Park told reporters that they agreed to make sincere efforts to improve relations between Seoul and Tokyo. He added that the talks touched upon many issues. Pundits say they could have exchanged views on a possible summit between the two countries as their top offices have been trying to arrange talks between President Yoon and Prime Minister Fumio Kishida on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. On Tuesday, lawmakers will continue their second day of questioning officials to make sure the government isn't kept checked. As part of the four-day schedule, the second questioning session will cover topics ranging from diplomacy to unification and national security. This comes during the National Assembly's first regular session since the Yoon administration took office. Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, Unification Minister Kwon Young-se, Defense Minister Lee Jong-sub will all attend the session. It's expected that the ruling People Power Party will focus on looking into the previous Moon administration's North Korea policies. The main opposition Democratic Party is expected to ask questions on the cost of moving the presidential office as well as the government's response to Washington's Inflation Reduction Act. The National Assembly will cover economic issues on Wednesday and education, social, and cultural issues on Thursday. Now, Monday's topic for the interpellation session was national politics. From the corporate tax rate to a stalking crime that led to public outrage. Kim Bo-kyung brings the highlights from that session.
The very first interpellation session under the National Assembly's first regular session kicked off on Monday. For 4 days, it will cover a wide range of topics. Monday's was focused on politics. Grilling public officials, the main opposition Democratic Party criticized the government's push to lower the top rate of corporate tax at a time when the country is heading towards belt-tightening mode with the 2023 budget plan. According to the Finance Ministry, the corporate tax reduction is expected to amount to around $9.3 billion as the top rate goes from 25% to 22%. To this, Prime Minister Han Duck-soo replied that such a tax cut for firms is to encourage investment and create jobs. Regarding cutting the budget, he said it is for the country to improve its fiscal health.
Lowering corporate tax is a global tendency because if it is high, not only is it hard to bring in global firms, but domestic firms can't survive. Finance is the last bastion for all economic policies, so the country needs to secure its fiscal health.
The recently scrapped contentious plan of building a state guest house at the new presidential compound has also been one of the issues, along with how the government should efficiently tackle the Inflation Reduction Act that negatively affects Korean EV automakers. When asked about the stalking murder at Shindang Station, the head of the Justice Ministry said he will do his best to make sure that nothing like this happens again.
Stalking crimes are not just limited to women. Anyone can be a victim. So we've announced that we are to abolish the provision that says a perpetrator cannot be prosecuted without the agreement of the victim and can have their location tracked. But it's still not enough, so we'll try our best to protect the victims.
The interpellation session aimed at making sure the government is kept in check will go on until Thursday. It will touch on a variety of issues related to national security, the economy, and other social issues that the ruling People Power Party and the main opposition Democratic Party are clashing over. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
The OECD has raised its growth projection for South Korea slightly. However, there could be headwinds from inflation. The organization believes that significant increase from 3 months ago. Here's Shin Se-byuk with a breakdown of the digits.
The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, in its biannual report released on Monday, raised its outlook for South Korea's economic growth this year and also for inflation. It's a mixed picture, according to the report, of a recovery in the local economy alongside an economic slowdown globally. The prolonged war in Ukraine is pushing up energy prices and disrupting supply chains, resulting in runaway inflation and prompting central banks to tighten monetary policy aggressively. Citing these, the OECD revised this year's inflation outlook for South Korea to 5.2%. This is up 0.4 percentage points from its projection in June. This would be the highest since the record 7.5% in 1998 during the Asian financial crisis. As for next year, the OECD projects inflation of 3.9%, up 0.1 of a percentage point from its previous projection, based on the assumption that global oil prices remain around the same as now through 2023. However, there is a silver lining. The OECD expects the South Korean economy to grow 2.8% this year, up 0.1 of a percentage point from its June projection on the back of solid exports and what it calls the country's skillful management of the pandemic. This is higher than the most recent projections from the Bank of Korea and the International Monetary Fund. The report noted that in 2020, as the pandemic began, South Korea saw one of the smallest GDP contractions among the OECD countries, followed by a strong export-led rebound in 2021 and early 2022. For next year, however, the OECD slashed its forecast to 2.2% from the earlier estimate of 2.5%. The organization explains that the 2023 outlook is clouded by geopolitical uncertainties, such as the war in Ukraine and possible lockdowns in China. Meanwhile, the OECD also called on South Korea to strengthen its social safety net, saying weaknesses there exacerbate income inequality and poverty, particularly among the elderly. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
It's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into some of the key issues in the spotlight right now. The number of new COVID-19 cases has been on the decline here in South Korea, with Monday's tally 20,000 marking the lowest figure for 10 weeks. So what now for the country, and what about the rest of the world? To discuss, we have Dr. David Kwok, Assistant Professor of the International Clinic at Suncheonhyang University. For more, good morning.
Good morning.
Now first, the country's decline in cases comes despite a long holiday that prompted a massive movement among people in the country. We did have a slight uptick, but that's right now is certainly a good news. But are we really out of the danger zone?
Well, I don't want to be the person who actually ends up scaring people, but as a physician, I don't think I am really free to say that we're completely out of the danger zone yet. It being from the fact that we still have the littlest possibility that this smallest seed of fire can still sprout up to cause a mountain fire, meaning we still have the virus transmission spreading through the nation, despite the fact that it being very, very low, probably the lowest in a short while. I believe we've hit about 19,000 of confirmation cases yesterday. And also, we're seeing roughly around 300 or 500 or so people being admitted in the ICUs, and also having about 30 cases of death per day. That shows me that even though we are on the decline in regards to the curvature, we're not completely safe with the numbers yet. We don't call influenza, for example, safe to deal with. We don't call tuberculosis safe to deal with. So even though we do foresee that we are going to have much brighter and safer future, I'm not going to call ourselves completely out of the danger zone where we can just run outside and really feel free to not care about the virus. So we should be careful about that. But I do foresee also that we will go further down in the confirmation cases numbers.
Right, you're not going to be completely out of the danger zone when it comes to an infectious disease like this. But that brings to the second question, as the government has begun discussions over lifting the mask mandate. Are you personally, as a doctor, for or against the mask mandate right at the moment?
Well, I'm actually for the mandate of keeping the mandate of masking, that is. Even though we do see in many other countries that lifted up the mandates for keeping the mask on inside or indoors, I think it works better for us if we were to keep the mask on. I do see a lot of people, especially the younger generations, complaining, comparing ourselves to many other countries around the world that, you know, such and such countries are lifting their mandates. Why do we keep it on? We have to remember that our social distances really differ from that of other countries. Even though we see large, massive, concerts going on, and also a lot of people gathering in very proximate distances in the outer parks, there are still situations where we have to come across much elderly people or much more vulnerable people with, heavier underlying diseases and whatnot indoors. Let's say at a supermarket or department stores and whatnot. So I think for the time being, as we gradually move on to the next phase of the pandemic, I think it'll be safer for us to keep the mask on at least in the indoors, but rather go easy on the outdoors.
Right, and as you mentioned, people have been comparing our situation with other countries, but now looking at the other side of the spectrum, China's COVID-19 situation seems to be getting better with some of the lockdowns being lifted. Well, they famously have the zero COVID policy. Do you think that's what's worked for China?
I honestly don't think it's worked because it's not completed yet. I believe that when they start lifting up the complete lockdowns in certain geographical areas, they're going to see certain numbers of cases sprout again. The zero COVID policy, I don't think will ever physically really work for an entire country. That being said, us having gone through the massive numbers of natural infections on top of having most of the people inoculated worked better for us because that gave us the higher level of immunity against future possible transmissions, as opposed to China, because they have locked down so strictly, the people hasn't gotten enough exposures and chances to get natural infections and be immunized with such methods, even though they claim that they have inoculated themselves. So they have to depend only on the vaccinations to count for immunity against upcoming COVID-19 situations. So I think they're more in a vulnerable place where compared to other countries that have gone through natural infection transmissions. Zero COVID policy, I don't think it's never feasible completely. Also in a sense that future-proof, I don't think it's going to work as well as the other countries that have gone through natural infections.
Well, thank you so much for your insights as always, and thank you for joining us this morning, and have a great day, Doctor.
You too. Thanks for having me.
For a look at the news from around the world, we now turn to our Matthew Ashley, standing by at the Arirang newsroom. Good morning.
Good morning to you, Do-yeon.
Let's start in Japan, as the country has been hit hard by Typhoon Nammadol.
Well, that's right. According to reports, 2 people have been killed and 1 is missing. and at least 115 have been injured. Now, the typhoon first made landfall as a Category 2 hurricane on Sunday in Japan's Kagoshima prefecture before moving northeast across the country. Alongside violent winds, the storm has broken rainfall records in parts of Japan and is expected to deposit up to 300 millimeters of rain on the central Tokai region until Tuesday evening. Now, some 9 million people were told to evacuate their homes, and the storm took out power from 340,000 households, though some power has been restored. Now, rail services on Kyushu Island and around 800 flights were also cancelled on Monday. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has delayed his trip to the UN General Assembly in New York this week in order to assess damage from the storm. Now, at least one person was killed after Mexico was struck by a 7.6 magnitude earthquake. The tremor hit the country's central region of Colima on Monday, 1 p.m. local time. This took out power and damaged buildings. Now, thousands of people in Mexico City evacuated into open streets for safety, though no damage in the capital has been reported. The Pacific Tsunami Warning Center also issued a warning that tsunami waves of 1 to 3 meters high were possible along the Mexican coast. The earthquake came just an hour after the country held its 2022 national drill, an earthquake safety exercise. It also fell on the anniversary of 2 previous earthquakes in 1985 and 2017, both of which caused widespread devastation. Now, the Taliban have released an American captive after 2.5 years following a prisoner swap deal with the U.S. According to reports on Monday, Navy veteran Mark Friedrichs is being exchanged for Bashir Nurzai, a tribal leader and early supporter of the Taliban movement. This comes after Friedrichs was abducted by the Taliban in Kabul in January 2020, while on a construction contract after having lived in Afghanistan for over a decade. Now, Nurzai, meanwhile, is a convicted Taliban member who was put in U.S. prison on drug trafficking charges 17 years ago. The swap was made possible when U.S. President Joe Biden granted Nurzai clemency, a decision he said he did not take lightly. The deal comes 5 months after the U.S. secured a separate deal with Russia that saw the return of Trevor Reed, a Marine veteran. And finally, amateur aviators attempted to take to the skies in their homemade aircraft at Taiwan's Taichung Harbor on Sunday, and this was for Red Bull's Flugtag, or Flying Day. 45 teams made aircraft in all shapes and sizes, from butterflies to flying sea turtles and manta rays. They launched their designs off a 6-meter-high ramp, attempting to fly as far as possible before crashing into the sea below. Now, the winning team reached a distance of 32.75 meters. This was in an alien aircraft design, while the runner-up reached 12.42 meters. The event was first held in Taiwan and was watched by some 50,000 people. Flugtag got its start in 1992 in Austria and is now held in several cities each year.
Good morning. Now that the threat from Typhoon Nammadol has passed, conditions have gotten much calmer and breezier. Morning temperatures are about 5 to 8 degrees lower than the same time yesterday in the capital and many areas. So hope you are dressed a bit warmer than yesterday. And we'll see a dip from the summer-like afternoon. We have been seeing figures going down to slightly below the norms today. So some dramatic change in weather in just one day. Brighter skies with high UV rays in most parts of Korea. In South Coast regions, we'll see stronger UV rays during the day today, so don't forget your sun protection items today. Breezy morning temperatures will rise quickly along with sunny skies to just below 25 degrees Celsius. Seoul, Daejeon, and Chuncheon will top out at 24 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Now, the weather looks promising for next few days, but wide gaps between the mornings and afternoons will continue under clear skies with morning rain in the forecast on Friday. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
That wraps up today's New Day at Arirang. We'll be back tomorrow for our Wednesday's edition at the same time. Please stay with Arirang News for more updates throughout the day. As for me, I'll be back with Global Insight in a few minutes. We'll have two experts joining us to discuss that Biden's recent policies that resemble former President Trump's America First policies. So see you soon.
망가져요 옷 구겨져요 신발 날아가요 요리 찡겨